You think you can do these things, but you just can't, Nemo!
I hate you.
Finding Nemo is a film presumably titled that because the whole thing is a father searching to find his son, named Nemo. However, I think the title also works from the perspective of Nemo himself, this little fish who doesn't really yet know who he is, who hasn't been afforded the space to find himself, but in the course of the movie is given a really nice arc of realising he's far stronger and smarter, and more capable than he'd previously believed. And whilst a lot of that perception stems originally from Marlin's past trauma that we will of course discuss, I'm a trauma therapist, we're obviously going to mention it. However, we shouldn't also forget that Nemo has a disability. He has this smaller, weaker fin.
He was born with it, kids. We call it his lucky fin.
Dad.
For which Marlin worries he can't swim well enough to keep up with the others, may tire more, and that's not exactly wrong, but it's also become the accepted truth for all of Nemo's life, and that puts a barrier on his sense of self. You know, as people we generally want to feel ourselves capable of growing and changing, so that even if many aspects of the world might be difficult for us, we can still adapt to manage them, or overcome them, or carve out our own way of living into the world. But when you're told as a big blanket statement that there are just things you cannot do, and you're given this total ceiling to your identity, how are you supposed to learn? How are you supposed to change and live? And there are always things we cannot achieve as people, but when you let that define you, or in this case, when your father pushes that definition onto you, that's when living goes from something ever evolving into something very static and flat. Finding Nemo is a movie about Marlin overcoming his fear and past trauma, but it is also a movie about Nemo discovering his autonomy and letting go of learned helplessness. So as you may know, I've been going through all of the Pixar movies recently, discussing them from a therapy perspective, as well as generally analysing, critiquing, and coming up with my own rankings for the lot of them. So if you like the sound of that, there are plenty of other videos I've made on the Pixar film so far. There are plenty more still to go in the coming weeks. But we should probably begin now, as we always do, with the coolest of trains. So, as that intro may have hinted, we're going to start this video by discussing Nemo before we get to Marlin, and I've been a bit strong with some of the wording there because Nemo is not a character that entirely reflects learned helplessness, so much as reduced self-efficacy, reduced belief that challenges and obstacles are opportunities to master or overcome, or opportunities to grow, instead tending to believe more that they are pitfalls to avoid and to be afraid of tackling on your own. So, on the one hand, Nemo isn't afraid, and that's really good. He's really excited about school, he's eager to go and play with the others, to go out exploring for his first class. Even when he gets hurt, Nemo is pretty undeterred.
Are you woozy? How many stripes do I have?
I'm fine.
Answer the stripe question!
However, when faced with a challenge that's new to him, Nemo generally defaults to needing other people's help. He needs Marlin to help him get out when he's stuck. He's daunted by the sight of the open water.
My dad says it's not safe.
When he's stuck in the tube, he calls for his dad to help, and then for Gil to...
Can you help me? I can't. I have a bad fin.
And we can feel how Marlin has pushed a lot of disbelief onto Nemo. You can't do things on your own, is what he says. Nemo is in conflict between that idea and his own sense of agency, really. And I think as a result, for most of this, Nemo doesn't consider himself helpless, doesn't consider himself incapable. He is a confident, eager kid, and that is a testament to Marlin's ability as a father. This isn't all bad, you know? I think most of the time Marlin would be very encouraging. That's the impression I get. He does want Nemo to go to school, and I think if you asked him, he would have said, yes, Nemo is capable. He might need a little extra support from time to time, but he is very capable. I reckon that's what Marlin believes, and he's not wrong. It's just that what you think consciously can still be contradicted by what you fear. Marlin is very encouraging towards his son, does on the surface believe him very capable, but when faced with situations that are considered unsafe or unfamiliar, then the fear warps his perception, you know? And so similarly, Nemo doesn't consider himself at all helpless, but when suddenly faced with a situation that's daunting, his go-to response is to call for help, to not try to fight on his own, which would seem he has learned and mirrored from Marlin's own fear. Self-efficacy isn't about the reality of what you can and can't do. It's about your perception, your belief as to how competent you are as a whole. Do you feel that you can try, that it is worth trying? Consciously, Nemo feels competent and wants to prove that, and yet more subconsciously that belief becomes fragile when anything happens to challenge it. Does that make sense? Marlin's fear itself has pushed the perspective so much that Nemo can't do things, or can't be trusted to do things, that there's then only really 2 times Nemo does really try to push himself. One is an act of rebellion. Nemo has no intention to swim into the open water until Marlin appears to scold him for something he wasn't even going to do.
You're about to swim into open water!
No, I wasn't.
It's just a good thing I was here. You know you can't swim well.
I can swim fine, Dad, okay?
No, it's not okay. You think you can do these things, but you just can't, Nemo!
You know, this quite understandably angers Nemo to the point he now wants to prove his dad wrong, but not really as an act of growth and development and getting to feel positive about what he can achieve, so much as an impulsive, quick moment of rebellion meant to scare and anger his dad. He swims right out to the boat and keeps going further every time his father warns him not to, and this is of course going too far. It does put Nemo in danger. Nemo shouldn't be doing this. He's been called incapable and shown up in front of his new friends, so much so that Nemo now has to kind of reject that idea altogether. Really keen to show the total reverse, you know, totally unafraid, that there's no danger whatsoever, everything is perfectly fine, rather than a more healthy middle ground perception here. And I really empathise with Nemo in that spot, especially when there was an early moment at the start of the film where he is just trying to calmly manage Marlin's anxiety.
Sometimes you can't tell because fluid is rushing into the area. Now, any rushing fluids?
No.
Are you woozy?
No.
How many stripes do I have?
I'm fine.
Answer the stripe question.
3.
No!
Like, you can feel Nemo is worn down by his dad overreacting constantly, but he knows arguing will only make it worse, so Nemo is forced to sort of manage his dad here, and that's a hell of a burden for a kid to have to bear time and time again. And it's not unsurprising in that sense we here see it lead to Nemo pushing back too much. So yeah, in that sense this doesn't feel like a positive moment of Nemo discovering it is safe to grow his own agency. However, the second time Nemo really tries when faced with an obstacle is not until he is stuck in the pipe, and not until Gil tells him they won't help him out. Nemo must learn to break himself free, and he shows Nemo that he too has a bad fin, and yet never let it stop him from doing the things he wanted to do.
You get yourself in there, you can get yourself out. Calm down. Now, alternate wiggling your fins and your tail. Just think about what you need to do.
It's only after Nemo then succeeds here that he starts to face up to challenges more and more and starts to believe he can overcome them. And that's quite a nice contrast between trying too hard to do something too dangerous out of frustration with his father, kind of attempting to project all of that fear, all of the helplessness back onto Marlin actually in that moment. The difference between that and genuinely believing you can succeed. At the least that you can try, and it is worth trying, not to prove anything to anyone else, but because you want to grow and you want to do more and you want to find more agency. Culminating in the real climax of this film, which isn't the two of them reuniting. It is Marlin letting his son go, trusting that he will be okay.
I can do this!
You're right. I know you can.
Which crucially, trusting he will be okay, not knowing. We can never know whatever's going to happen with total certainty, and yet as human beings we constantly choose to trust, and there's something really beautiful about that impulse, I think. We all have limits as people, or fish, I guess. We can't deny their existence, but the true problems only really come when they dominate our perception so much that we impose even bigger limitations upon ourselves, restrict our own autonomy and our own sense of who we can be. And we can obviously go further than this, but it first means discussing Marlin for a second, talking about trauma and parenting and all of the many scary obstacles Marlin himself encounters that surprisingly often are not as bad as he fears. Very rarely are any of the dangers in this film as bad as they first appear, such as the big, scary, horrible sharks that turn out to be quite friendly, really. Sharks get a bad rep. I like sharks. And you know what the best shark of all is? The surf shark. Yep, this video is sponsored by Surfshark. Because every day I think VPNs are becoming more and more important, especially if you've got a presence on the internet or you care about your privacy, because a VPN will encrypt all your online activity, helping to block all those ads, malware and hackers out there in the big blue ocean, making it a much safer place to swim. Not only does Surfshark help keep me private from snoopers and trackers, but it also comes with antivirus software, it can monitor for data breaches, it can create alternative aliases for your email addresses, which is really useful for all the different signups. And it comes with its own ad-free search feature for if you want to search the web without having to sift through all the sponsored results and just for you recommendations that I think everybody must universally hate. Look, I mainly use Surfshark for three things. First, security. Second, the freedom to browse the internet from other parts of the globe without the same restrictions I have here. Like I'm learning Italian and so I want my Netflix to show me some Italian films I can watch, like La Vita Va Cos'è. Yeah, or say your country doesn't offer you all of Poirot to watch, but you can if you set it to the UK. Third, something I talked about on my Discord a while back. Why have I only just found out that if you watch YouTube with a VPN set to a different country, you get ads from that country's language? That makes it so much more bearable.
Non fermarti, passa le Pringles.
I bet you can get some wild pulls setting it to Japan. I might just try that.
コツコツ積み立て投資だと思って。
For both my phone and my PC, I constantly have Surfshark on, and I've just found out you can even get it for your smart TV too. My girlfriend can also have it because one account can be used on unlimited devices. Plus, you can get a 30-day money-back guarantee and 4 extra months with Surfshark for free using the code TREEVPN or using the link surfshark.com/TreeVPN that you can find in the description or the pinned comment to get you surfing safely with Surfshark. I really love Marlin as a character, and I think it's really important to his characterization that he is mostly correct. As much as I say the dangers are rarely as bad as they first appear in this film, it is still chock full of bad things happening constantly. Like, there is so much just suddenly happening in this film all the time, and it's a real testament to the writing that it never feels like the plot just bouncing all over the place in a way that's jarring and incoherent. Nemo gets taken. Then Marlin chases him until he finds Dory, who he follows until a giant shark leads them away and then tries to eat them when he smells blood, and then all of the mines explode, and then they bump into an anglerfish that tries to eat them, and then they're given directions and end up surrounded by jellyfish, and then they wake up on turtles, but once they leave the current they get swallowed by a whale, and then they get swallowed by a pelican, and then they find Nemo but get caught in a net. It's a lot, and almost all of these events happen out of nowhere, because this is the big scary ocean where anything can happen without any prior warning. Exactly the same as the Barracuda just suddenly appearing at the start of the movie, you know? That's life. It's not just the danger itself that's so scary, but also how unpredictable it is. Marlin cannot know what is going to happen next, when it is going to happen. Therefore, the only safe thing he can do is hide away from everything altogether. But as Dory so eloquently tells him,
well, you can't never let anything happen to him. Then nothing would ever happen to him.
The thing about trauma in this sense is that it isn't always irrational. Same with anxiety, actually. People panic and they say, well, what if this bad thing happens? Or what if that bad thing happens? And I mean, obviously there's a bit of a spectrum to it, but yeah, it might. Sometimes they are correct. It is not irrational. A bad thing might happen. However, trauma is also the sense that the traumatic event you went through has never stopped happening, really. Part of you still feels stuck in that time, so when anything happening in the present happens that might trigger it, all of the same feelings spike to all of the same degree. You go into red alerts, even though this is a totally separate incident and can have a totally separate outcome. My dad used to do this a lot. Something bad would happen, like even just a toilet breaking, and he'd say everything is falling apart and it'd feel like his whole life was crumbling around him. But this is one separate incident. It's not linked to everything in his past, no matter how much the brain is programmed to treat it as part of a pattern. And if you look at it as a separate incident, and you can say, yes, this bad thing might happen, irrespective of anything else, then what would I do if it did happen? How could I respond? How could I cope? And this is more a CBT approach, I would say, but you're kind of challenging the belief of, if the bad thing happens, I couldn't cope, by asking yourself, well, how might I? And might that be a better fight to make than sitting with the safer, more certain, yet infinitely bleak timelessness of hiding inside the belly of a whale? Which is what Marlin resigns himself to do at this point in the movie, were it not for Dory. And it's great for how this parallels Marlin previously hiding away in his home. People often call this kind of thing avoidance prison, the decision to keep yourself safe from fear in the short term, but at what point is you avoiding your fear simply suffocating your life? Marlin's wife and 399 of his children were wiped out in an instant. That is horrifying, and it leaves Marlin feeling terrifyingly out of control. Therefore, Marlin wants control over all things in order to cope with that feeling of being out of control, which leaves him very controlling towards Nemo and very controlling towards Dory, and is incredibly certain that he knows best in all things because he has to be on top of everything. He feels he needs that. The second Marlin feels out of control is the second he feels that Barracuda might appear again. But really, the only thing we can control is ourselves. And that's both a very scary thought and also quite a liberating one, I think. And we can cut a distinction between the events of the past and the events of the present, that there can be situations that are kind of dangerous, or at least uncertain, or feel out of your control, yes, and those situations may dredge up similar feelings as a result of that. However, they don't necessarily merit the same intensity of reaction, and don't necessarily have the same outcome. When Nemo gets stuck, Marlin is afraid, not just because Nemo is stuck, but because if a barracuda showed up while he was stuck, Nemo would die. And because of that Marlin needs to take charge and insist he must get Nemo out himself. Even when Nemo could have managed, I think if Marlin were to stop and think logically here, he could believe Nemo capable of getting himself out, but this is also about Marlin's own need for control, which I think is an important aspect of Marlin's trauma too. He tells his wife to go back and hide, but she doesn't because she wants to get to their kids, and she may die as a result of that decision. We don't know what happens. Marlin doesn't see, but it's likely that's what he assumes. If she'd listened to me, if she'd just let me handle it, she would have lived. And so, if Nemo just listens to me and lets me handle absolutely everything, if Dory just listens to me, they will be safe. Except, obviously Nemo wouldn't be safe. He would never grow and never learn how to manage situations on his own. And not even just in a physical sense. The idea he also needs Marlin to manage all decision making. That's why Marlin rushes to Nemo when the class is near open water. It's not just that the open water is scary, it's that you need me there to stop you going into it. You need me there to remind you it's unsafe, to make the decisions for you. And when there are other strange, unfamiliar situations that would require your intuition for how to respond to them, I can't trust you to make those decisions. I have to make all the decisions for you. And in that sense, Marlin is making his son way more incapable than he's making him vigilant, you know? To the extent he often doesn't even listen to Nemo.
No, I wasn't.
It's just a
gonna
good thing
go
I was
after
here.
Dad.
If I hadn't shown up, I don't know.
He wasn't gonna go. Yeah, he was too afraid.
This does not concern you, kids.
I think it can be a bit of a parenting trap to just constantly assume you know best in all situations because you're older and wiser, or probably wiser. But you can't assume that. It stifles Nemo's sense of autonomy, his own skills and own ability to figure out what to do, and those are skills he needs to strengthen. Therefore, Nemo needs to be allowed to have input, to sometimes get it wrong, to be allowed to think. The events of this film force Marlin to realise he can trust Dory, and then consequently he can trust Nemo. But they also teach Marlin that not being in control of all things does not necessarily mean terrifying, traumatic danger. There is a distinction between the past and the present, and letting go not just of our kids, but of our own need to micromanage the entire world around us, our own need for total control. Letting go of that is a healthy and essential thing to do. It seems scary at first to realise you can't always be there for your kids, until you realise you won't always have to be. My favourite parallel of this film is that as much as I've said Marlin thinks his son can't do anything and must rely on him, Nemo also sort of thinks that about his dad. Like when Nigel tells him his dad is swimming across the ocean and is fighting sharks and everything, Nemo thinks,
he's been battling sharks and jellyfish, all sorts of...
That can't be him.
my dad can't do those things, he is incapable, you know? Except, yeah, maybe he isn't incapable if he lets himself try. I think swimming itself is probably a good analogy for that, actually. You can't control the current of the ocean, but you can still steer yourself within the waves, and I think that analogy just about makes sense. But let's talk more directly about parenting now. Parents need to let their kids struggle. Don't take that quote out of context. The classic example is with infants, like stacking blocks or, you know, putting shapes in the correct holes or whatever. It can be a difficult task for a kid, and sometimes they get a bit distressed as a result and maybe look to their parents and they scream or cry like they're saying, I can't do this, or this is too frustrating, or I'm too useless at this task. And in those situations, parents often make one of three possible mistakes. One is they get frustrated with their kid's distress and they go, oh, for God's God's sake, this is just some shapes. And maybe even take them away from the kids, and obviously this is bad, I don't think I need to explain that. The second is they rush in to solve it for the kids, to show them how it's done so that they can remember it, which sounds good but denies them the chance to manage that feeling itself of struggling, of learning to sit with the uncomfortable feelings and sit with the uncertainty, which are hugely important for the child to develop emotional resilience and to build self-esteem and to manage anxiety. Or thirdly, just completely leave the child to swim in the deep end without any help at all, and then likely the sense of distress will be so big for the kids that they just give up. And this will then be what they learn from the experience of the shaped objects, that it's really distressing to try something unfamiliar and difficult, therefore don't do it. But the fourth option is, of course, the nicer, more middle ground of giving them encouragement when they're distressed and saying, yeah, it looks tricky, doesn't it? But I think you can do it. And when necessary, giving a few little hints, but not doing everything for them. A healthy, safe, managed amount of struggle. Maybe that sounds a tad dramatic an example when we're literally just talking about stacking blocks here. And I think I've said Marlin would probably be good in these kind of moments as well. He's not averse to ever letting Nemo struggle. It's just when he feels this added sense of danger and uncertainty, that's when his instincts to take over kick in. Nonetheless, this general idea applies to a lot of situations for a child growing up, and it's exactly what Crush does in this movie.
Let us see what Squirt does flying solo.
You know, he's not leaving his son to suffer there. Crush is watching and will step in if something is really wrong. Same with the teacher at the start of the movie. He tells the kids to explore, but keeps an eye on how far they go. Crush gives his son Squirt the space so that he can succeed, and Crush can then celebrate the success with him. Marlin has to do the same, even if that means they experience failure. As a parent, you want your kids to fail. Also, don't take that out of context. You want to give them the freedom to try things whether they fail or not is probably a better way of saying it. If they succeed, then you can celebrate, and if they fail, then you will be there for them. You will tell them it's okay, to not be afraid, to not believe it means they are useless, and to know that they are still loved regardless of how they do. You know, it requires boundaries and comfort in an environment where it is safe to fail and when it's not left to be too distressing, but with the right amount of support, it is a very healthy experience. I can attest to that. I've known failure all too well. I must be the healthiest person in existence. No, look, Finding Nemo is a movie about Marlin finding the courage to let go and Nemo finding the courage to try. And together they become a really solid team. Also Dory, who I should have talked about more, but you know, I figured she gets her own movie later down the line, doesn't she? I've never seen Finding Dory, but I will at some point soon, and I imagine a lot of the stuff I might say here could be repetitive if I then have to say it again in a second video, so hopefully I can discuss Dory a lot more then. In general, I don't think there are really many flaws to pick apart with this film and how it's structured and how it's made. It's unconventional, I think. You know, who the hell is the antagonist this film? It's not Marlin, he's the protagonist, unless maybe you count before Nemo gets taken, but they're not really interacting for the vast portion of this film. They're trying to get back together. Darragh and the dentist are maybe a bit, but they're barely there. They're more like a sense of threat, I think. No one is really at all villainous either. I think maybe the antagonist is just the general, faceless, pervading sense of danger, and that's really cool. I think Gil's character never amounts to anything more in this film like he should. He mostly goes forgotten at the end, but that as a whole, I think this is a pretty flawless film. Trying to be as objective as a subjective brain can be, I would say it's a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, and yet personally, I don't connect with this one quite as much, despite how moving it is.
And I look at you and I'm home.
And I'm finding it hard to pin down why I feel that way. I think it might just be because I don't find this the most creative, immersive world of a Pixar movie. You know, this film is mostly just Marlin and Dory swimming in a direction of blank water until something dangerous happens, and then that happening over and over again. And I suppose I'm just not sucked into the adventure in quite the same way. It doesn't give me a sense of wonder, nor for the ocean, and it's very soft in its criticisms of fishing here. You know, this one is a really really, really unfair criticism for me to be making, but it does kind of bug me how little exploration there is for the environmental themes here. There's one scene where some divers grab Nemo to just put a couple of fish in a dentist office, and then there's another scene where they're all caught in a net at the end. But when Marlin travels God knows how much of the ocean this film, surely he would come across the vast portions of it that have been absolutely devastated by bottom trawling, which is a far more damaging and widespread issue than gill netting, which I think is the form of fishing we see here. Bottom trawling is where they have this gigantic net with a large metal beam at the bottom that just cuts and smashes through everything on the ocean floor. And it's not just that it catches a ton of fish, it's that it completely decimates coral reefs and seagrass, smashes through a lot of the ecosystem that the fish depend on to live, often only for the sake of catching one species of fish and then just discarding everything else they catch. So much of the ocean has been devastated by this in ways that might take decades or even longer to recover, if indeed trawlers even leave the space alone enough to recover.
Trawlers tear the seabed with such force that their trails of destruction can be seen from space.
Makes it impossible for so many species to survive. It releases 1 billion tons of CO2 every single year. It is a huge issue I wish was talked about more. And it's unfair to criticise Finding Nemo for not showing something so traumatic. The slight sense of villainy to the fishing boat at the end here is a lot softer in comparison to what bottom trawling would have been. And also, this is 2003, we were less aware of its effects then, even if it was still a problem. But the film we get, I think, makes it look like this is the worst of fishing. Something a bit unpleasant and cruel for a net full of fish, but not the mass destruction of an entire planet it often serves to become in reality without greater regulation. So how am I ranking this film? It's brilliant. I can't volley any substantial or valid criticism at it. However, because I don't personally feel as warmly about it as some of the others, I'm going to put it 6th on my list so far, which by the way is still incredibly high. Like, when this list expands out, I suspect both The Incredibles and Finding Nemo to still hold these kind of spots. The videos I made on Toy Story and Inside Out are fairly old, so perhaps I'll do a rewatch and find I rank them differently. We shall see with time, but for now, you can watch those old videos to maybe see why I rate them so highly. But also, I put out a poll already asking you what you thought of Finding Nemo. Admittedly, the poll's only been out 19 hours at the time of recording this, however, it does have 2.1 thousand votes, which is a lot for my channel, and 48% said it was brilliant, 45% said good, and 3% said a bit flawed. So, using the same slightly flawed but consistent maths I've been using for all my other videos, I calculate that to work out as an overall score of 80%. So 6 less than the score you gave The Incredibles. I don't think it's that much less. I think they're very different but pretty similar films in terms of quality. Both of them I would be scoring higher than 86% to be honest, but comment your thoughts. Let me know what you think in general, good or bad. You can subscribe or maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee. Or what I recommend to best keep you in the loop about my content is just to join my Patreon as a free member. You might not get all the benefits that you would get from a paid subscription, but you will be notified about the new videos I've shared far more consistently than YouTube notifies people. So consider doing that, look out for my other Pixar videos in the near future, and hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Luke Hoare, Michael Gallagher, Ben Marie, Thafy, Chad Bramwell, and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.